All right. Welcome to Talk with History. I'm your host, Scott, here with my wife and historian, Jen.
Hello.
On this podcast, we give you insights to our history inspired world travels, YouTube channel journey, and examine history through deeper conversations with the curious, the explorers, and the history lovers out there. Now, Jen, before we jump into the podcast tonight, I'm not going to ask for any reviews. I actually want to give a couple shout outs.
Oh, cool.
So I don't think we ever gave shout outs. We had two people in our community actually visit the Walk with History gift shop and either leave a donation and make a purchase. This is a little while ago.
That's cool.
So I wanted to give a little shout out to Eric and Jeannie, who either got a hat or left a donation on the channel. And the fun thing, we just kind of updated and modernized the Walk with History gift shop. So the merchandise you see when you see Jen wearing the History Nerd hats, that is something that we're doing now. You can find those. You can find that with the walking person, without the walking person on there. So a little bit more generic. Some t-shirts and other things like that. We have more designs coming. I'm going to try to bring some back, some Talk with History stuff. But I just wanted to give a little shout out. And if you make a purchase on there, or if you decide to visit there and something strikes your fancy and you get it, I'll actually give you a shout out on a future podcast. So thanks to Eric and Jeannie for showing some support. And we really truly appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
And if you're interested in visiting the Walk with History gift shop, you can go to walkwithhistorygiftshop.com and look at the History Nerd stuff or the Walk with History merchandise that we have. That's walkwithhistorygiftshop.com. Now, Jen, I don't really have any sort of preamble, right? We're talking about the video.
Sure.
So we just visited Alexandria. We spent a whole weekend up in Washington, D.C. We've got a lot of great content coming out for you guys. And we hung out there for a good 3 days, and we crammed a ton of filming in. But the first place we stopped was Alexandria Cemeteries.
Yes. So I had visited there when we filmed The Female Stranger. And I was just so amazed that this cemetery was kind of tucked into the center of Alexandria. Right in the middle of everything was the cemetery. And I found it so, again, striking that these cemeteries were very segmented by religion.
That was interesting.
And race.
That's not anything I've really seen anywhere else.
No, so I'll let you know how old school it is.
Yeah.
Because here we are in Alexandria. The cemetery started in 1803, so right after the birth of our nation. And people are very segmented by their religion,
especially back then.
And even if it's Protestant, it's all these different Protestant religions.
Yeah.
It's Episcopalian, Methodist, and Baptist. And then, of course, there was a Jewish cemetery, and then there's segregated for race as well. And then there was a national cemetery. So,
and one of the things we throw out that's kind of fun in the beginning of the video that I didn't know, we both didn't know until we got there, and we were just kind of reading the signs, and a lot of people commented on the video that Alexandria National Cemetery, which we visit at the end of the video, was actually kind of the precursor to Arlington.
Yes.
So that was pretty cool.
That's pretty cool to learn. So there really wasn't as big of a need for a national cemetery.
Not at the time.
At the time, you had the Revolutionary War, but the people who were killed in the Revolutionary War were killed more on the outskirts and the different skirmishes that happened outside of the cities areas. And so when the Civil War starts to happen and people are killed in the cities, mostly, not from just combat, but from illness, they ran out of places to bury them. And so they had to find national land because the country was burying them. The country was bearing the cost of the funerals. And so Alexandria was quickly filled. And that's when Meeg started to look around. He was in charge of finding national burial grounds. And he was very upset with Robert E. Lee because they were friends. And he knew he had a great location and a great home right there in D.C. And he needed land in D.C., so that was the precursor to Arlington. He started burying people at Arlington.
Yeah, I thought that was so neat, and it was kind of fun to introduce that in the beginning of the video. And we'll loop back around to it when we talk about Alexandria National Cemetery at the end. But one of the first graves that we visited, I thought was actually kind of one of the most entertaining stories because it wasn't some gruesome demise, but it was this character who kept trying to escape the actions of the Civil War and just couldn't seem to. So who did we visit at first?
So we went to Wilmer McLean, and Wilmer McLean has the distinction of being in the same place, the same location of the first battle, like the first serious battle of the Civil War, at the first battle of Bull Run, and then the very last battle, and it was at his home that the surrender takes place. So he was a grocer in Manassas, and the battle takes place and destroys his home and his business. They actually have the cornerstone of his home at the visitor center at Bull Run.
Yeah, Battle of Bull Run.
And he just wanted to get away. He's like, I'm going to move 3 hours away in the middle of nowhere, and the war won't follow me.
And we show it on the map in the video. This is a 3 hours by car.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a couple days, right? Maybe
sure.
a week
With all your stuff.
With all your stuff, maybe 2 weeks. I mean, he's got a lot of stuff, right? This horse and buggy still back then.
Yeah. And you can imagine if he was a grocer and his business was destroyed, he's going to have to set up a new business somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so then the battle comes there
4 years later.
And he has a nice enough home because if you remember, like generals and officers are commandeering homes everywhere they go for the Civil War to set up a headquarters or a makeshift, just residence. And so they commandeer his home down to surrender.
Poor Wilmer McLean, poor guy.
So,
and it's funny because
he's buried in Alexandria.
He's well known enough that it actually wasn't too hard for me. I know when someone's a little bit more well known because I do the research after the fact and look for pictures or articles or things like that. And they actually call his house out, right? The McLean house at Appomattox.
Yes.
Right. So it's actually they recognize that and they kind of say, hey, yeah, he used to live in Manassas when Bull Run happened, moved to get away from the war, and then the war finished on his doorstep.
And he's not far from the female stranger, so I kind of point that out from our last video about Theodosia Burr. But and he's buried beside his wife and his daughter, and it looks like a family plot.
Yeah,
that's probably why he's in Alexandria.
Yeah.
So that was kind of neat.
Yeah, it was pretty neat. And then after that, we went over to, I think it was the Presbyterian Cemetery, and if I remember correctly, and then it was the two graves that were in there were Robert Allison Jr. and Dennis Ramsey. So, so who were they?
So first of all, you need a code to get into that cemetery. However, there's a low wall and you can get in that way.
Although to be fair, the sign does say it's open, Monday through Saturday, right? So if it's open, it's not like you're allowed to go in there.
You're allowed to go in there. And people were jogging in there and walking their dogs. So a lot of people had that code.
Most of the locals must have that code because we saw them walking right in and we were like, and we kept trying to catch them. But you had already kind of worked your way around.
So Robert Allison Jr. has the distinction. If you remember in the War of 1812, when D.C. is basically overcome by the British, right? It's burned and there is fight back. There is a battle that ensues. Now, granted, D.C. is not in the hands of the British for long. It's 26 hours. There's a storm that rolls in. They call it the storm that saved D.C. Puts out all those fires, and the British leave, and they lose their General Ross pretty quickly after that. So they kind of are disheartened anyway. But one of the young men that's killed is at a landing in Alexandria area, and it's called the Battle of the White House. And then that landing, they fire on the ships that are leaving D.C., and they actually make those ships founder. They hit the shoals and founder. But one of them is killed, and his name is Robert Allison Jr., and he dies on September 5th, 1814. So young man gave his life in service to his country. It's a very ornate marker that it's almost like a historic marker. Yeah. It gives this whole story.
And it's not a super well known, I wouldn't even call it a naval battle, but piece of that. It's well known enough for the history nerds over here.
Yes.
I was kind of
everyone knows the burning of DC. Everyone knows the saving of the Gilbert Stuart painting of George Washington.
It's another aspect of that.
Right. So
those events.
It's that event. It's that story.
Yeah. And then not too far from him, in fact, almost right next to him, was Dennis Ramsey.
Dennis Ramsey. So Dennis Ramsey is Washington's pallbearer. And, I kind of had to look some stuff up to kind of understand his significance. He was the mayor of Alexandria at one point, and he delivered an address to George Washington. But he also fought in the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, so he knew. It sounds like he knew George Washington was probably relatively close to him if he was a pallbearer at his funeral.
And George Washington had attended his mother's funeral because it was a distant relative to George Washington's mother.
Okay.
So they are kind of related at the same time. So that's why he's George Washington's pallbearer. It's more than just he fought in the Revolutionary War with him. He was the mayor of Alexandria. He gave some speeches with George Washington present because George Washington was very present in Alexandria. And their mothers were distantly related.
Yeah, and that makes more sense, especially back then when... a lot of the people then, it's not like the Americas were drastically populated.
Sure.
A lot of people were distantly related.
Exactly. And so, I think it's all of that kind of like respect and family connection. And so that's why he's a pallbearer. There's a whole, there's a lot of research into the George Washington pallbearers, if you're interested, where they stood along the coffin. So he doesn't have like a prime location, if you would call it that.
Oh, I didn't know
but
that.
he is one of the pallbearers.
I guess for large historic figures like the first president of the United States, people are going to study whatever they can.
Exactly.
That's interesting. I had wondered why you had picked that, because I was like, what's the big deal with like, I say, yeah, that's cool, but like, what's the big deal? But for the first president of the United States, anybody that's involved in any sort of event surrounding him,
it's going to be an inaugural, right?
He's got a place in history. He was there, at the funeral. He was carrying that stuff.
And this was kind of this video was released close to Washington's birthday, February 22nd.
Yep.
So it was kind of a highlight to kind of pinpoint him as well.
Yeah. So then after that, we kind of move a little bit further down.
Well, after that, we talk a little bit about the segregation of the cemeteries.
Right.
So we talk about the Frederick Douglass Cemetery.
Yep.
And if you see it, you'll go down Wilkes Street and you'll see like a cemetery with lots of tombstones, and then you'll see to the right a more barren cemetery. And this is like the African American cemetery, and of course segregation. The cemetery was established in 1895, but people were being buried in it probably 50 years before that.
Yeah, and it's not in use anymore.
It's not in use anymore. And there's close to 2,000 people buried there.
Really?
Even though you only see about 700 markers. And honestly, as a historian, that is very common.
Oh, wow.
For African American cemeteries in America, because most of those people were enslaved or had just bought themselves their freedom, did not have the money for stone monuments like whites would have had. And so even though they're buried over there, they're using a lot of wood. They're using a lot of different things that did not last the test of time.
That's interesting. So obviously I didn't know that. If you just saw my reaction, I didn't know that when we were there. That would have been interesting to try and frame right within the context of a video to show like if they had buried them like any other one with a headstone and kind of the spacing and all that stuff, there's no way they would have fit 2,000, maybe 200.
Yeah, and they have done grave mapping of that cemetery, which is done often when there's not a lot of tombstones to mark where people's bodies are. And it's in that mapping that 2,000 bodies, and they're not orderly and symmetrical.
Oh, wow.
And,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, and that's also very typical. If you're going to study enslaved cemeteries or free African-American cemeteries, you're going to find that kind of burial practice because of the lack of space and of the lack of resources.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, just across the street right there from Douglass Cemetery was probably your favorite, I would say your favorite grave that we visited.
My favorite grave. I know it's a kind of a weird thing to say.
Yeah, when you do this enough, you gotta.
But when I saw who it was, I was excited, and I was excited because it's a central character in my favorite football movie.
Yeah.
Remember the Titans, and we went to Julius Campbell's grave.
Now we went to Julius Campbell's grave. So if you've seen Remember the Titans, right? I wouldn't say the primary character is Denzel Washington. Right?
Sure, he's the coach, Coach Boone.
He's Coach Boone, right? These two high schools that become integrated relatively late, like you point out.
Yeah, it's
in the
1971,
70s.
right? And so you have Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954, and you're getting civil rights in the 60s. We just talked about Loving versus Virginia. That's 1967.
And the high school was in Alexandria.
It's in Alexandria, and that's 1971.
So I want to show you guys a quick clip from that movie, and it's one of the clips that Jen and I talked about. And there's a later one. I won't show that one here on the stream, but I want to show that clip real quickly here, so you kind of know what we're talking about if you've seen. So this is the scene with Julius Campbell and his
Bertier,
right? It's basically his white counterpart.
Yeah, so they're both the captains of their respective football teams from the schools that integrated.
Right.
And so you have the best athletic ability of both. And so everyone's looking at them for leadership. And this is the moment. I love this moment because this is the moment where you see them kind of complement each other and then also
call each other out. Yeah, this is a great spot.
Junior, and you know Julius Campbell Jr. from Remember the Titans.
Honesty? You want honesty? All right, honestly, I think you're nothing. Nothing but a pure waste of God-given talent. You don't listen to nobody, man. Not even Doc or Boone. Shiver push on the line every time, man. You blow right past them.
I'm supposed to wear myself out for the team? What team? No. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look out for myself and I'm going to get mine.
See, man, that's the worst attitude I ever heard.
Attitude reflect leadership.
Okay.
And I just love that scene because they're both thinking they're the righteous ones.
Yeah.
And then they both come to realize that it's bigger. It's bigger than just football.
Yeah, and I actually cut that scene short, mostly just for the video, because Julius Campbell kind of calls out Bertier right there. He's like, hey, you're not telling your fellow white players to do their piece as well. Don't tell me
that I have to
do my part when you're not telling that to your fellow white players. And then you see it kind of set in on Bertier. And so it was really neat because hearing you talk about it as I was making the video, Julius Campbell was actually, like you said in the video, he was known for just kind of being a good guy.
Yeah, and that's kind of, he kind of had this dual personality that he was, just very rough and tough on the football field, and then off the football field he was a very quiet, soft-spoken guy. But what happened between Campbell and Bertier is it became like best friends.
Yeah,
and they did lead this football team to a state championship. So if you think about Virginia and football in 1971 and an integrated school going all the way to win the state championship, what happened in that is not only did the school come together because you're winning and you're champions, the city came together and essentially the state starts to come together. So what they did through sports and athleticism is just, it's amazing.
Yeah. And so I said I wasn't going to show it, but now that we're talking
the great
about
unifier.
I'm so excited about it. So I'm going to show the next scene where they really click on the field.
It's the moment. It's the moment where everyone sees it.
This is the moment right here.
All right, you really stuck him, Campbell.
Yeah, I love me a little contact, Petey.
Left side.
This is the moment right here.
Wrong side.
Left side.
Wrong side.
Left side.
Wrong side.
Left side. Left side.
So that's kind of like a congratulatory cheer,
Right.
that they're doing together.
Yeah.
That they're tough together. That left side, like they need both sides
Right.
to be strong.
Left,
and so
left side and the strong side.
it's a celebratory cheer, and so everyone sees that for the first time that they're working together, and that's kind of what brings the team. Now, who knows if that's actually what happened, but in essence, it is what happened because they did do that, the two of them together.
And they went to the state championship.
They went to the state championship. So you have to have a winning, cohesive team to win a state championship.
Yeah.
So I had to celebrate Julius Campbell. He's number 81. He's buried there. He's right on the street.
Yeah.
You can't miss him. And I had to celebrate his life. And just to know that was Alexandria, to know that all took place there.
Yeah, I mean, so think about it. It's like across the river from the nation's capital,
Mm-hmm.
right? I for some reason, even when I thought of Remember the Titans, even though I know that they went to Gettysburg for the training camp,
Mm-hmm.
I for some reason in my head when I thought of the movie, I think of like the Deep South,
Yeah.
right? Like somewhere in Mississippi or something like that, and then all of a sudden when we're talking about it, it's like, oh my gosh, no, it was right here,
Yes.
you know, in Alexandria, which is, you know, DC's, Washington DC's next door neighbor. So
Yeah.
that was really, really neat. So moving on from there, we actually went down to a couple of kind of some older graves. I mean, there was one Revolutionary War grave.
Yes. So we went to like 2 Confederate graves, basically, and a Revolutionary War grave. So we stop at James Mason's grave. And James Mason, you might not know the name, but he was one of the early backers, or would you say supporters of the Confederacy.
Yeah.
When Virginia seceded from the Union, he put his support in the Confederacy, so much so that he tried to go to England to get support from the British.
That's right.
To back the Confederacy. And he went on a ship called the Trent, and the Trent was stopped by a Union ship, and they put him in prison in Boston. But because the British were upset because they were coming to give them money and they were going to work out a deal. And then
he was essentially like, they kind of made him like the Secretary of State for the Confederacy.
Yeah.
almost.
So this became the Trent Affair. Like
This
this
was a
was
big
a big
deal.
deal. This
Yeah.
almost pulled England into the Civil War.
That's crazy.
And they would have probably backed the Confederacy side. And who knows what kind of aid they could have given. And who knows how it could have turned the tides of that war. Because they were stopped, because Trent was put in because Mason was put in prison, the British didn't see the benefit
Sure.
of joining the.
I mean,
so
just
they
like
kind of stayed out of it. But if he would have made it over there and could have negotiated, who knows what could have happened.
Yeah.
But he's instrumental in the Trent Affair, and that is his grave there in Alexandria. So. But then we walk over to Samuel Cooper, who's super cool.
Yeah. So again, there was a couple, it was a family plot.
Yes. Again, so Mason's a family plot and Cooper's a family plot. And actually, there is a connection between Mason and Cooper.
Oh.
Because Samuel Cooper's son, who you will see the Confederate Samuel Cooper, was married to Mason's sister.
Oh, I don't
So-
think I caught that.
So yeah, I just read that myself.
Yeah, how
Find a
interesting.
grave. Find a grave will show you who's connected to. So that's kind of, they're all right there in the same family.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, like, I'll call him Cooper Sr.
Okay, so Cooper Sr. has a cool marker that's giving you his whole bio.
And it looks like, so if you watch our video, it looks like they actually, like, there was the original marker that
It's
must have
on the
fallen down.
ground, yeah.
They put it on the ground because the stone's probably so old, and then they created basically an exact replica.
Yes.
But it's actually standing upright, so you get to see the original one.
Yes.
I imagine it's the original one.
Yes.
And then basically like a more modern version, like they've kind of fixed it up a little bit.
Yeah, so here's the Samuel Cooper is born in 1756. He's 16 years old at the Boston Tea Party, which he attends, which he's part of at 16 years old.
Yeah.
Then he's in the Battle of Bunker Hill. He's in the Battle of Monmouth. He's in like all of these huge Revolutionary War battles. He's a part of them. He's coming of age in 1776. He's 20 years old. So he's going to all these battles of the Revolutionary War, fighting beside George Washington. And it's just instrumental in winning the Revolutionary War. So he has a couple stars and recognition there for what
I think
he did.
He finished as a major.
Yes.
Now was it his son or his grandson?
It's his son.
Okay.
Because I looked it up. So he must have had him when he was 40 years old, which is
Okay.
not
All right.
crazy. So his son, Samuel Cooper, who's buried right beside him, has a marker. He's the highest ranking general in the Confederacy. higher than Robert E. Lee.
That's crazy.
His name is also Samuel Cooper.
Yeah.
And he's right beside him. So then you get like a CSA star, right beside Confederate States of the Army, Confederate States of America. I've seen it both ways. But a CSA star right beside it. So it's very odd.
Yeah.
Now, Samuel Cooper Sr. passes away in 1840. So well before the Civil War. So not there to kind of put his boot in his son's butt and, say, what are you doing?
Hey there, kiddo. You're fighting for the wrong side.
But they're buried beside each other there and they're very close to the road and a walkway.
And that's I guess one nice thing about the way that this cemetery is set up. It's large, but there's roads kind of running between the different kind of segmented cemeteries.
Very walkable cemetery. Like I said, a lot of people walking their dogs.
Yeah, we saw a ton of people walking their dogs and jogging. Coming through and all that stuff. So because it's right smack in the middle of the city, right? There's apartment buildings on every side.
Yes,
basically.
Yes.
So even like when we were talking about the Douglas Cemetery, right? Again, I kind of like to step back and talk about the setting. It was an interesting setting because, there's the very formal, and we'll talk about it here in just a minute, Alexandria National Cemetery, very formal, closed gates, white stones. You saw the picture of our thumbnail. And the reason I included the picture, that particular picture for the thumbnail, is I kind of liked the two different, like the dichotomy of this wall going down the middle, and there's Alexandria National Cemetery on the left. And then there's what was probably some not taken care of graves. I don't know if this was one of the colored cemeteries at the time, but it was stones falling over and this, that, and the other. And so it's two very different cemeteries, literally just divided by a wall. And so that setting amongst smack in the middle of a city with apartment buildings, and then we'll talk about Hoof's Run, and it was just different. It was really, really neat.
Well, and I want people to understand too, with the Frederick Douglass Cemetery in particular, just because that's where they have identified the locations now does not mean buildings have not been built over where graves were.
Yep.
So in most old cities of America, cemeteries were on the outskirts of the city. However, as cities have grown and grow out, those graves are either relocated or not relocated and just built over. And one example, prime example, will be Memphis, Tennessee, because the main cemetery in Memphis, Tennessee, some tombstones were moved, the graves were not, and now it's the parking lot for St. Jude.
Oh yeah, you've mentioned that. I remember you've mentioned that a couple times.
And that is pretty common. You're going to see probably that a lot in New York City. There have been times in New York City digging foundations or digging subways, and they hit graves. There was a very interesting study where they found a metal grave. Yeah, they did a whole PBS special on it. It's very interesting. They were popular in the early 1800s.
Interesting.
But so unless a cemetery is marked, maintained, there's some kind of trust to take care of it, it can go into disrepair. And if that land is prime urban land, you could be living over those graves.
Yeah,
I mean,
interesting. That doesn't surprise me. Even though it's surprising when I hear about it, it doesn't surprise me that happens, because I've heard of that happening before. Now, if we're moving on from James Mason and Samuel Cooper, again, right next to those, kind of at the end of the street, was the much more formal Alexandria National Cemetery.
So beautiful.
It was gorgeous. We talked a little bit about it, so you guys have heard the background. Essentially, this was the precursor to Arlington National Cemetery. So I think you said it was they really kind of started using that spot when there was yellow fever that swept through in the early 1800s.
Yes, they started using the whole cemetery, but the National Cemetery wasn't really started until the beginning of the Civil War.
Okay.
When they just had so many unknown soldiers in the first couple battles, and they needed to bury them, and the federal government needed to bury them. And what's interesting about that, it's not a large cemetery, which is why you could probably see it would run out of space relatively quickly. It is beautiful. I had seen it for the first time doing the Female Stranger again when the wreaths were all still on the graves for Christmas. So it was just breathtaking. But one of the things we visit there is a marker to 4 gentlemen who died in the pursuit of John Wilkes Booth.
Yeah,
And they died of drowning crossing the Potomac.
that's right.
And they were civilians that worked for the quartermaster. So they weren't technically military, but they are buried in in Alexandria National Cemetery.
We looked that up kind of think after
Yes.
the fact.
So there's a marker to them. It's like a boulder with a bronze statue on it. And the 4 of them are buried in Alexandria National Cemetery for their service to their country in pursuit of the assassin Booth.
John Wilkes Booth.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting, right? And sometimes I'm surprised that I'm surprised because I'm wandering around Virginia and DC and the East Coast, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's tied to what that other thing that we just visited, right? We went to Booth's house, and we went to
Mudd's
Dr. Mudd's house, and we went to this, we went to that, and oh yeah, this is the same thing as that over there. It's like, well, it's all in the same area,
Yeah.
right? So because that's where a lot of American history was happening for a very long time.
Sure. And when he leaves Ford's Theater, he's cutting through Alexandria, basically, like he's cutting down that direction. And so, of course, people would be pursuing from who lived around that area. But another historical location is at the back of the Alexandria National Cemetery.
That was interesting. Kind of a little bit heavier of a topic,
Yes.
but it's interesting, and I'm glad we covered it.
So Hoof's Run was a water feature, a waterway.
Yeah, creek or something.
Creek area. And Alexandria is a port. So when enslaved ships would come in to Alexandria from Middle Passage, so from Africa, they would take the enslaved off and make them bathe in Hoof's Run. And so you have women, children, and men who are bathing in Hoof's Run before they go into the slave markets. I don't like calling them slave markets, mostly like human trafficking prisons. And then before being transferred into, larger enslaved areas. Who knows how long the treks they're making, but to Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama. So this is the place that they would bathe.
Yeah, and it looked like there was a lot of work being done there. And I don't know if that was because, again, there's an apartment building across the street or whatever, or if they were actually building something up over there. Because I could imagine, right, some sort of walkway tribute to that.
Yes.
Right? Because that would be an amazing kind of just historical, kind of feature around the cemetery where everybody's always walking and running. And
Yes. I think they are building some kind of remembrance.
Yeah, some sort of tribute or something like that.
Marker. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was neat to see. And again, and I'll I don't do it too much, but I like to toot my own horn. I got a couple compliments on some of the videography and stuff. And
it was good videography.
And so just showing Hoof's Run there, and kind of like you got to get a little bit of a feel for what must have happened there, right? So it was interesting because there's not much there. It's not like this is a river. There was like very, very little. Now again, this is a couple hundred years ago.
Sure.
But it was interesting that all that's happening right there. Right. And it's called out. I mean, you look at Hoof's Run on Google Maps and it points it out right there.
Yes.
So it's a known spot, of history.
So what you get, you're getting life and death and, just hardship, overcoming, terrible hardship. And this is history.
Yeah.
This is the history of, a pretty significant suburb of our nation's capital, and it's all there in one location. And that's we don't do a ton of graveyards. We do a couple, but we always have enjoyed doing those kinds of videos because they're so different. The history makers and the people that are buried in a cemetery, and there's so much history to cover in their lives that it is just a pleasure. Like even this story, you get people from every war represented, and even current affairs that movies are made out of.
Yeah.
So, and they're all in one location. And that's why cemeteries to me are always just fascinating as a historian.
I mean, not only is it slightly easier for us to kind of film a video because it's all in one location, even though half the time we're trying to hunt these things down. So it's good to have kids if you're ever looking for cemeteries because you can just cut them loose. Hey, this is the name we're looking for. Go run around and find it.
Our youngest found McLean.
Yeah, that's right.
Because we could find him for a while.
But these interesting characters, right? Sometimes, I have other kind of production and podcast and video ideas that I've always thought about doing. And, we joke about who's the interesting character from Gettysburg that we always, Dan Sickles.
Yeah.
So we always laugh about him, but I think he's an interesting character. I would love to make a podcast series about him.
Yes, we will.
Or even like William McLean or Wilmer McLean.
Wilmer.
I think he's an interesting one. He's just one of those interesting characters in history who's got this. He wasn't a huge contributor, but he was just there.
Yes.
Right. And just for some reason, he kept popping up on the map. And I just thought that was so interesting. So that's, to me, are some of the things that I kind of take some joy out of for myself, is these interesting characters, right? And the hermit that lived at Fort Norfolk for a little while, I thought he was really interesting.
Yes.
And this, that, and the other. So that's the thing I like about finding these little interesting nuggets of history that we get to bring and share with you guys, because you won't find it really otherwise unless you're really kind of out there looking. And that's what we like to do, and that's what we like to share.
Absolutely. And I see some people on chat. Abel, I want you to know that I tried to get into Dolly Madison's house.
Oh yeah.
They don't let you in.
Yeah.
I called. I wanted to see, you had recommended where, they had the first meeting of the astronauts before they went to the moon, and they do not let anybody in. It's used as office space now. And I said, well, why can't I just see someone's office?
Yeah.
But they wouldn't let me in. But I thank you for the suggestion.
Yeah, we always love you guys joining us in the chat and joining us on the live stream. The emails that we get. I still have another email that I have to share with you. We've actually had some book authors reach out, or their publishers reach out to us. We're going to try to start doing some more of that stuff in the future. But we just get to do some super interesting stuff sometimes.
So I see, have you ever Camp Chase Cemetery in Columbus? We have not. I will probably do some more things in Columbus. It's hard for me to go to Columbus. I went to Penn State. And it's hard for me to go to Columbus.
She doesn't like driving to Ohio. I have family that live in Ohio, so that would be our only excuse to
But we
go
have
there.
done some cemeteries in Ohio. We did Lakeview in Cleveland. And that's an amazing cemetery. If you want to check out that video, because Rockefeller is buried there. President Garfield is buried there. There's a lot of history makers there. It's so many different people from different walks of life, and it's a beautiful cemetery.
Yeah, we have a playlist if you guys are ever interested in watching some of our other cemetery videos. I think I have the playlist. It's called Famous Graves You Can Visit. So if you go to our homepage, that's one of the playlists that has on there. You can kind of look and see which one kind of strikes your fancy.
Yeah.
And we also did
Elliot Ness is there.
Elliot Ness,
That's the big
but the Cleveland Torso Killer.
Oh yeah.
So that was all around the
If
Ohio
you
area.
are into that story, we probably have the best research video on the Cleveland Torso Killer.
We put a lot of work into that one.
We went to those locations. They're real locations, and we told you what happened, and that's what brings Elliot Ness into Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay, yeah. So Ray's saying that Boole Mansion is a local historical place, and then Pyman 64 is saying again Camp Chase Cemetery is a Confederate cemetery.
Yeah, then we'll definitely try. I mean,
if we're up there, if we're visiting my brother again, he lives not too far from
he
Columbus.
doesn't live too far from Columbus.
So we're always looking for things to do when we do either family trips, right?
Yes.
Like we've got a big family trip coming out.
Thank you for the suggestion.
Yeah, we love the suggestions in the chat. But we do have some family trip stuff. Huge Western trip we've got coming up this summer. So there'll be fun content coming out later in the summer, early fall as we catch up. But we're going to be recording a ton of stuff. So,
but thank you. If you have any other questions or suggestions, please let us know.
Boole Mansion is in Sharon, PA.
Sharon, PA.
I don't know where Sharon is in Pennsylvania.
I think it's Eastern
PA.
But thank you for watching and joining.
Thank you again for joining us on the Talk with History podcast, especially to those in the live stream. If you're listening to this podcast, please feel free to join us on the live stream. So if you want to reach out to us, you can reach out to us at our website, talkwithhistory.com. But more importantly, if you know someone that might enjoy this podcast, please share it with them. Especially if you think today's topic would interest a friend, share the video, shoot them a text, tell them about the Talk with History podcast, because we rely on you, our community, to grow, and we appreciate you all every day. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Thank you. Sorry, Ray. So it's in Western PA. I should know that because I'm from Western PA. Is Sharon like?
Is that like outskirts of Pittsburgh?
No, I think it might be by Erie. Actually, let me look. We should be getting back to Pennsylvania in the summer. So.
But yeah, we appreciate everybody that's joining us in the live stream. Obviously, I'm gonna this kind of after. After the closeout chat won't make it into the podcast, but we love jumping on these live streams and chit chatting with you guys. Like
it's like halfway between Pittsburgh and
Erie.
And Erie.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like it's right on the border
above Pittsburgh. Okay.
I think it's barely in Pennsylvania.
Right.
Yeah, it looks like it's right on the border of Ohio.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you for the suggestion.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, guys. We're going to take off because, we're both still working full time, but we love doing this. We really, really do. And we love all your guys' comments. I really do enjoy the emails and the comments and all that stuff. I love seeing the familiar names, especially here in the chat for you guys joining us. And for anybody that's watching us on Facebook, we're starting to stream to live to Facebook now. So please feel free to drop some comments over there, or you can jump over to YouTube anytime and kind of join us over on YouTube when we do these on Thursday evenings. So again, thank you all.
Yes.
You guys are a big reason why we keep doing this, and we appreciate everybody. So
yes.
You guys have a good evening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.